This next session will be a two-part series. It will be the first part conducted by myself, where I'll be introducing you guys briefly to our cryptocurrency investigation tool called Tracker. And then I'll be passing the time over to my colleague, Robert, who'll be walking you through a couple of case studies so you can actually see the tool in action a little bit. Now, in the previous session, we introduced Compass. Now, Compass, which you guys saw, was a wallet and transaction monitoring tool that is mainly used for compliance, right? So its main purpose is to monitor a wallet in order to flag for illicit activity, whereas Tracker's use case is designed more to allow investigators to visualize transaction flows, see how criminals are moving their funds, with the goal of course, providing actionable data. A lot of what we do at Merkle is that we do focus a lot on automation. So in Tracker, we've developed a number of different features to help speed up investigations, and we'll talk about a couple of those in a second. But the other thing that I want to point out is that here at Merkle, we do focus a lot on Tron, right? I think it's one of the blockchains that we've seen in recent years that have gained a lot of traction amongst bad actors, especially because the liquidity of certain stablecoins on Tron is very high. But the other thing that we also do is we focus a lot on cross-chain tracing and investigations. As you guys know, every single blockchain is its own unique data set, and criminals do take advantage of this fact by moving assets from one blockchain to another blockchain in order to make it more difficult for investigators to trace those, right? So we do have coverage for more than 24 different blockchains today, as well as more than 50 different bridge protocols. Now, typically when you look at a blockchain transaction, this is what you would see at its very core, right? You see addresses sending, addresses receiving, and dollar values, right? And visualizing data in this manner can be quite challenging if you're trying to trace, because oftentimes the information that you see on the Explorer doesn't let you know who controls these wallets, and it doesn't really provide you with a lot of context, right? Cryptocurrencies are pseudonymous by nature, which means that whilst you don't know who controls a wallet, you can at least see the wallet ID that's attached to the transaction. And a lot of what we do here in blockchain analytics is to help you guys visualize this information more effectively. A key component about blockchain analytics then is attribution, right? And when we talk about attribution, we're really saying who controls a certain wallet. Typically, the goal of any investigator conducting tracing is to do one of two things. Ideal scenario, you recover the funds for your victim. Reality, it doesn't happen as often as we like. And so if you're unable to recover the funds, the next best thing that you can do is hopefully try and identify the individual organization behind the incident, so hopefully that you can take claim against them personally. And I'm sure we have a lot of lawyers in the room who would be more than happy to help you guys out with that process. Where blockchain tools come in then is to provide our clients with that useful insight, right, as to who controls these wallets so that they can hopefully identify these off-ramp services who can yield valuable KYC information to de-anonymize these owners of these wallets. At Merkle, we collect information and data through many different channels. We do it through dusting, through partnerships, through scraping on the open web, as well as we do partner various intelligence groups who share information. I think in the cryptocurrency space, partnership between the private and public sector is vital when it comes to trying to impede these attacks, because oftentimes these assets are moving so quickly that unless you have a direct channel into these exchanges, it's almost impossible to stop these criminals from cashing out in time. Thankfully, more and more cryptocurrency projects, businesses, and issuers today are starting to think about building compliance into their tokens with the ability for them to proactively freeze wallets in order to retrieve funds. But as much as that is popular among financial institutions, I can tell you a lot of people in the crypto space are still not a big fan of that idea, because the whole idea behind cryptocurrency at the end of the day was to allow people independent control of their assets. But the way that regulations are evolving, thankfully we are seeing more controls being built in. Now, just collecting information is very time consuming, and it's very slow if we're just going to collect addresses one at a time. So here at Merkle, we do rely a lot on AI, as well as different heuristics that we've developed in order for us to expand beyond the addresses that we collect into what we call clusters, right? Which are basically groups of addresses which are controlled by the same individual or organization. And because we know the importance of data, I think it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, as blockchain forensics becomes more established, courts today are no longer just taking the word of providers at face value, right? You can no longer, say, hey, funds ended up in this exchange simply because the tool that I'm using says so, right? Courts today expect you to be able to articulate where you got the information from, what are the heuristics that you applied in order to determine if an address really belongs to a certain entity. And here at Merkle, we do take a very transparent approach to how we attribute addresses and businesses. So in the event that you guys require attribution source reports as to where we got our data from, all of that can be produced upon demand. And so with that, allow me to jump straight into showing you guys a short demo of Tracker, and then I'll pass the time over to my colleague to go through one or two case studies. So what you guys are looking at right now is the landing page of Tracker. Typically, when you begin an investigation, you would start off by looking up an address. So if we look up an address in the tool, immediately we'll tell you if this address is on our attribution database. In this case, this is an address that is owned by the Lazarus Group and was officially sanctioned back in 2019. Now, here at Merkle, we allow users to investigate in two different modes. We have what's called an address-based investigation, as well as what's called a transaction-based investigation. Now, depending on your use case, an address-based investigation allows you to find relationships between addresses which you may not realize. Right? So one of the benefits of it is that if you add, let's say, 100 addresses on the board, and those addresses have historical transactions with one another, it will automatically link up, right? So it can effectively show you relationships. We developed the transaction-based board because a lot of times, today with law enforcement, when it comes to seizing of assets, they need to be very granular with their tracing, right? They need to identify the specific transaction that had stolen the asset, as well as trace it downstream in order to prove which is the asset that they have jurisdiction to seize. And so the transaction-based board is designed for more granular tracing. But in the interest of time, I'm only going to walk you guys through a little bit of the address-based board so you can see it in action. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new board. We see the address in the middle, and if I click on it, we see this panel with some valuable metadata. Right? At the top, we can see attribution information, a quick summary of its transaction history, but more importantly, we can see its exposure. Right? And like I mentioned, typically with investigations, what we want to identify is where did the funds come from and whether or not the funds might have eventually ended up in an exchange, which we can contact for valuable insight. So in this example over here, we can see that a sizable amount of funds have actually come in from the AVEX network. And with a focus on automation, here at Merkle, once you've identified an exposure, be it direct or indirect, you do have the ability to rely on an auto trace algorithm which we developed, which at a click of a button, and depending on how complex or simple it is, the tool will actually automatically map out how funds might have originated from point A and ended up in point B, right? And as we can see in this particular case study, the criminals had actually attempted to launder the funds through multiple different layers, whilst consolidating the funds at one point over here, and consolidating it again over here, right? So this is an example of what I meant by a cluster. It's a group of addresses which we know by analyzing their transaction behavior to be controlled by the same individual or entity, right? And so even if we don't know who that individual or entity is, the tool still has the ability to cluster them as one. And so we intentionally designed this feature because, following from one of the questions that one of the audience had for me in the morning session, how sophisticated are criminals? Well, this is an example of, I would say, slightly more sophisticated than normal, right? A lot of simple crimes are actually a lot simpler than this, where we can see funds actually go into an exchange within 2 or 3 hops. And so the intent for us to design this auto trace feature is to really help law enforcement quickly trace a lot of those low-level crimes and provide them with immediate actionable insights which they can use in order to try and retrieve the funds. And so in this case, for example, if we see funds going out to Huobi or Binance, users can actually immediately click on the auto trace feature again and rely on the tool showing us how funds went from the Lazarus group, how it was moved through a couple of different intermediary wallets before going into Huobi. And immediately, law enforcement would be able to quickly export information about this transaction and contact Huobi in order to hopefully get vital KYC information as to which one of their client controls this wallet. So as you can see, Tracker is more of a visualization tool that provides additional insight over transactions and addresses and cluster as compared to Compass, which is more of a monitoring solution that is rule-based alerting. So with that, I will just pause my demo over here because I think the more exciting portion of this session will be when you hear from my colleague who will walk you guys through some actual case studies. Yeah. So with that, if I could invite Robert back on stage.
I don't want to overpromise. We only got 10 minutes, so there's not a whole lot of walking. We're just going to talk about.
Just run.
Yeah, we're going to run through something real quick. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about something that's, well, I think most of you in this room probably have heard of, and that is pig butchering. Who's heard of pig butchering? Anyone else? Yeah. So it's a pretty vicious scam out there, right? I mean, let's see. Thibault, how do we get this on the screen here? Do I have you want to? Oh, plugged in the wrong one. It helps if you get the right one. So pig butchering is, a lot of us, let me do this. When I first heard about pig butchering and romance scams, I thought to myself, that is kind of just a basic scam with a new type of value. There's really not much different here. But the issue is that it's a very complex scam, and it's a transnational crime that's occurring via transnational groups. A lot in Asia, which is unfortunate, but that's where we see a lot of the compounds sitting in like Myanmar and Cambodia and Thailand. And these compounds, there's more than one aspect to pig butchering as well, because it's not just the romance scam and people losing a lot of money, it's the human trafficking side also that's happening. In order to facilitate these compounds that they have people working at, they will put out fake ads for employment. When people show up, they get kidnapped, and then they get taken to these compounds in these countries. You know, Philippines was the last big place that there was a enforcement action taken. They took down a large compound there. You're talking thousands of people who are set down at desks, computers, and they have a script and everything to go through to essentially run these scams. And if they don't work hard enough and they don't make enough money, then they get tortured and beat and all kinds of other things. So it's not just a scam in a sense to, you know, the guy down the street called your grandma and got $1,000 from her. That's not what's happening. It's a much more in-depth scam than that. So, and it really manipulates victims into these schemes. So how many people here have gotten a text like that? Not really a lady on a bike. I've never gotten a text from a lady on a bicycle, but you know, you see these texts that pop up, and I get them quite often. It says, "Hey, was that you at the club last night?" I'm like, "Look, I'm 57 years old. I was not at the club last night. I guarantee it." Or like, "Hey, was that you at the golfing range?" And all that is a little bit of a hook to get out there and say, how many people had this type of text? Yeah? Okay, well, it must be really prevalent in the US because everyone gets them there. Little hook that's, and you're like, I don't know you, I wasn't golfing. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, well, how are you today? And it begins. And that's how the beginning happens. So you're doing a lot of texting back and forth. They're getting to know you. They're getting to know your psychological profile, and you'll see some very slight inquiries about who you are and where you are and what you like. And there'll be very slight inquiries like, oh, I didn't realize I had the wrong person. Oh, by the way, where are you located today? Is the weather nice? And you're like, oh, no, I'm in whatever place. Well, now they know where you're located. Oh, and, I was looking for my boyfriend's friend. Are you his wife? No, I'm a man. Oh, so now location, and I'm a man. Oh, where you weren't golfing? I don't like to golf. Oh, they don't like to golf. Well, what do you do for fun? And now they're setting you up and they're walking you down this manipulation line because that's exactly what they're doing. They're building that psychology, that little connection with you to make it a little more palatable for you to continue on talking. And so they're sophisticated, they're social engineering tactics, and they start dragging information out of you. All right? So they're building the relationship. Facebook accounts are also another place to meet people. I mean, Facebook is just rampant with fraud and scams. Over the last several years, we've seen LinkedIn. How many people have a LinkedIn profile? Most of us do, right? LinkedIn is another place. I often post, I don't know how many people might follow me on LinkedIn, but if you do, you'll see my post, and it's mostly about crypto and what we're doing and how scams are working and all this kind of good stuff. But there's usually that one person that jumps on that thread and says, oh, for crypto recovery, call me. And I'm like, that's a scam, and I delete his comment right away. But that's another scam type. We're not talking about that one. Many of these organized crime groups are out of Nigeria, or they're Chinese transnational crime organizations, but the point being that they're transnational organizations. They have no bounds, okay? We just talked about that. And it's a massive wealth transfer, if you think about it. The US lost $16.6 billion. That's just icing on the cake. We haven't even cut into the cake. It's gonna be a lot more than that. And over the next several years, if we can't slow this down, it's gonna be upwards of $100, $200, $300 billion that is being transferred offshore to fraudulent accounts that go into the pockets of nefarious actors. Just think what they can do with $100 billion. How much can they step up their game if they have $100 billion? What's coming at us? So I know we're a little short on time, but I do want to just get a couple things out. I got about 10 minutes. So how this works. So after they build that connection with you, and they make you feel like you have a friend somewhere in the world that really cares about you, and they do care about you. They care about how much money you got. So after that happens, they start setting the hook. Right? And this could take months. It's not one of these 5 minutes ago, I just met this person and I'm asking for crypto. This is 3 or 4 months later, they say, hey, I heard of a great crypto investigation, and that investigation, not investigation, but investment, and I have made $10,000 on it. And most people are very prudent and would say at that part, I don't have any money. I don't want to invest. Well, this continues, and then eventually they're like, well, what about $500? And you put 500, you're like, if I lose $500, who cares? I care, number one. But some people are like, who cares if I lose $500? But you put it in an account, and now your return is $2,500. You put 500 in, and you got $2,500 sitting in this site, right? It's a fake site. I think Tara talked about it earlier. I don't see Tara in here. But it's a fake site, and it looks beautiful. I mean, it looks great. Used to be, like she said, it was fairly easy to tell, because of the wording and stuff. Fairly easy, but not so much anymore. So you make this money, but it's a fake site. And then, wow, if I put $5,000 in there, what would I get back? Maybe 15,000? So you put 5,000 in, and then you see 15,000. You're like, wow, that's pretty good. Now, I've had people that put 8, 10, 12 million dollars into these, and I've actually worked their cases, and it is terrible. It is heart-wrenching to know they lost $10 million on one of these cases. But they start putting more money in, and then, like this one gentleman put 10 million in total. He had $100 million sitting there on this account, and he wanted to get it out. Well, that's the problem, right? Because once you're into them and you've put in all this money, They want to get more money from you. So what's the next response? Anyone tell me what the response is when you say, hey, this is beautiful, I want my 100 million? Yes, sir. Well, not necessarily rug pull.
There's a fee to unload.
There's a fee. There's always a fee because they want to get that extra money, okay? This is where the complicated part, they start drawing you in. And now you're fully committed because you spent that 10, 15 grand that your wife didn't know you had. Or maybe she did know you had, but doesn't know you've lost it yet. So now we got a problem, right? We have a huge problem. And I've seen people put their entire savings into these. So we have a huge problem. We want our millions of dollars out and we can't get it unless we pay the tax. So what happens? We pay the tax, right? I'm gonna show you what the tax looks like sometimes. The IMF, International Monetary Fund. If once you pay the tax and you're like, now I want my money, they're like, well, you know, we can't do that because you violated anti-money laundering laws. The International Monetary Fund has said that you owe them a tax now. All right, so we pay the tax. And do we get our money out yet? No, we don't, because then Europol has a tax. And this continues and continues until you basically said, you know what, this is a scam. Or you call someone like me at Merkle, and I look at you and I say, I'm really sorry, I can't help you. Please don't put any more money in that. And that presents another problem. The victims are sometimes very emotionally attached, okay? Very emotionally attached. And they don't want to stop. They want to put the money in. They want to continue the relationship because it makes, you know, they're getting something personal out of it, and that's the emotional bond that we see out there. So now, I'm going to tell you about some of the common characteristics of a pig butchering case. So first of all, they will ask you to put in crypto, generally, and maybe send some wires, some fiat wires out. Those wires will go to places like Hong Kong. We see a lot of wires to Hong Kong, HSBC. I don't know if anyone works for HSBC. I don't mean any disrespect, but we see them a lot of times go to HSBC in Hong Kong. And, you know, I will call some contacts at Hong Kong police and ask them if they can work on it, and the answer is always no. We have too many other things to do, and they do. So we see that, and then we see crypto, and then we see the movement to a layer 2 token. So we see either going into Bitcoin and they'll move it to a layer 2, usually Ethereum, or it goes in as Ethereum altogether. And that's because they will gauge the victim's ability to use crypto. Can they use crypto? If it is no, then they'll tell them to use Bitcoin through an ATM and get the funds to them. But if they have an account like Coinbase or something like that, or Kraken, or what used to be Bitstamp, they will ask them for Ethereum because it's a layer 2 and they can start moving their funds really fast. So USDT is a favorite. USDT on Tron is the favorite. Okay, so then it'll usually go to USDT and Tron, and then we'll see it just get moved down the line very quickly and end up usually doing a couple swaps and then down the line. And a little thing about Merkle Science and our tracker tool, we can get you through those swaps, and that's probably the positive thing. We can move you through the swaps very quickly and do it on screen. That is, I'm not done yet. So there is several other scams that go with these things too. I mean, we'll see the IRA scam, not the IRA, the IRS and CRA scams, that kind of stuff out there as well. But they're a lot less complicated than the pig butchering cases. Now, I will tell you, from an investigator's perspective, the most difficult thing in pig butchering is when people come to you 2 or 3 months later and say, you know, either I was or this person I know was scammed, and can you help us? And my first question is, when did it happen? And they say, well, it happened in June and we're in July. That's not too bad, but still, we're too far down the line. It happened in June and we're in January. It's way down the line. That is a historical case now, and you're not going to get your money back. I'm just going to be very blunt. You're not going to get your money back. If you know or if you have been a victim of pig butchering for whatever reason, and I see some professional people in here, but I've had lawyers, doctors, real estate agents. You're not immune. Trust me, you're not immune. Have this problem. If you find out that you've been a victim of pig butchering, then you need to come to somebody, either in law enforcement or another investigator like me, right away and start working on it, because that is the best chance you have of any type of recovery. That's the best chance. And that's because they haven't off-ramped it yet through an exchange somewhere. That's the key, right? They want to move it down the line and off-ramp it and be gone. It used to be in the old days that people got into crypto to launder money and obfuscate it. But now the point of crypto is to get the crypto and get it off as fast as possible into fiat and be down their line. So the rules have changed a little bit, the methodology has changed a little bit, but it's still the same old thing. It's still about value and taking value from you. So I will just, all right, I got about 2 minutes, so I'll leave it there. I wish I had the time to go through the whole thing with you because I have some really good evidence in here to show you as well. But if you want to talk about pig butchering, if you have an issue with pig butchering, like someone's been scammed, please let me know. We can talk about it, all that kind of good stuff. Any questions on that last 10 minutes? It was quick, but yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned off-ramping, right? Scammers are becoming a lot more sophisticated, right? So what if they never, they always stay on chain, for example? So how is that?
Yeah, I would actually love it if they stayed on chain, because then we can see it. And I've actually had the ability to influence the way they try to off-ramp by watching the transactions in almost real time, block delays, of course. And then I'll see like a portion went to Binance, and I'll call my friend at Binance, and I'll be like, hey, Tom, this is what happened, and they just went there. And then boom, they get their account seized. Well, now they know that someone's watching that operation. So now they have to think of another plan. Well, where am I gonna off-ramp it? And they'll send someone over to any other exchange, and I'm like, hey, this just happened, and it's in your exchange, and then they get blocked there. So because we're moving in almost real time with them and can see it visually, we can affect the way they're moving. And when your plan falls apart, you make mistakes. And that's the key. You want to affect the way they're moving it, affect what they're doing, and break their plan, and you have a possibility of forcing a mistake on their part. So I'd prefer if they stayed on chain as long as possible. But that's not generally the case. So, any other, yes, ma'am?
How easy do you find working with law enforcement to help you with some really big cases?
The good thing is I'm retired from law enforcement, and I have a lot of friends there, so I can generally call someone and say, this happened. The thing is I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I can't take any legal action. It's just basically, look, I'm seeing this. It's in your lap. Can you run with it? And they're like, okay, yes, we'll take it up, or okay, no, we will not. And it just depends on the value most of the time. So, $1 million case in the U.S. in pig butchering is not a substantial case. 4 or 5 million is what you need to get the U.S. attorney happy. A local case like the local London police or something like that, or local, like where I live, like the county sheriff or something, any amount they'll look at, but whether they do anything about it is totally different. So.
I've just got a follow-up question. A lot of scammers will use decentralized finance. Have you had any examples where you've recovered funds that have never touched a centralized exchange but stayed on chain?
Yes, usually those are layer ones like Bitcoin, but those are the less sophisticated type scams, and those are a lot more centered around a actual male-female or female-male relationship that was formed over the internet, and then there was a scam, but it's not as complicated as what we're talking about here. I hate to use the word typical, but it's more of a typical romance scam than a very well organized psychological romance scam, if that makes any sense. One last question, if anyone has one? Yes, sir.
Just what you were just saying there, is that how you would sort of typify the difference between a romance scam and pig butchering scam? Is the more psychological and sort of en masse nature of it?
I would, and that's because even though they're both just as brutal when it comes down to losing everything you got, one has a longer time lead and a much more emotional and psychological manipulation than the other one. But it's still just as vicious. There's no way around it. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's 12:30. It's time for lunch, or it's 12:32. So I apologize for taking 2 minutes of your time. Please be back here at what time, Termaine?
In about 45 minutes. I'll ring the bell.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.